August 13th, 1961. Berliners went to bed in one city and woke up in two. Overnight, East German forces had sealed the border between East and West Berlin with barbed wire, concrete barriers, and armed guards. Families who lived on opposite sides of the city were suddenly separated. Workers couldn't get to jobs. Children couldn't reach schools. A grandmother in East Berlin couldn't visit her grandson in West Berlin, just 2 blocks away. The Berlin Wall, the most infamous symbol of the Cold War, had been born in a single night. For 28 years, it would divide Berlin, Germany, and the world. Over 140 people would die trying to cross it. Families would be split for decades. 2 nations, capitalist West Germany and communist East Germany, would stare at each other across concrete and barbed wire. Then, on November 9th, 1989, the wall fell in a single night, ending the Cold War and changing world history. This is the story of the Berlin Wall, how it was built, why people died trying to cross it, and how one bureaucratic mistake brought it down and reunited a nation. It begins in the ruins of World War II. May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. The Allied powers, America, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, divided defeated Germany into 4 occupation zones. Berlin, deep inside the Soviet zone, was also divided into 4 sectors. The division was supposed to be temporary, but by 1949, Cold War tensions split Germany permanently. The American, British, and French zones became the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, a democratic, capitalist nation. The Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, a communist dictatorship. Berlin remained divided. West Berlin became a capitalist island surrounded by communist East Germany. East Berlin became the capital of East Germany. For years, Berliners could move freely between sectors. The border existed on maps, but not in reality. People lived in East Berlin and worked in West Berlin. Families visited across the divide. But this created a massive problem for East Germany. People were fleeing. Between 1949 and 1961, over 3 million East Germans escaped to West Germany through Berlin. Doctors, engineers, skilled workers, East Germany's best and brightest, were abandoning communism for capitalism. East Germany was bleeding to death demographically. If the exodus continued, the nation would collapse. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev approved a radical solution: seal Berlin completely, build a wall. On August 13th, 1961, at midnight, the construction began. August 12th, 1961, Saturday night. Berliners enjoyed their weekend, unaware that by morning their city would be permanently divided. At midnight, East German forces began Operation Rose. Soldiers, police, and construction workers moved into position along the border between East and West Berlin. They rolled out barbed wire. They dug post holes. They assembled concrete barriers. West Berliners woke Sunday morning to find their city surrounded. The border was sealed. No one could cross without authorization, and authorization would be nearly impossible to get. Families were split instantly. A woman in East Berlin couldn't visit her daughter in West Berlin. A man who worked in West Berlin but lived in East Berlin couldn't get to his job. Children visiting grandparents in the other sector couldn't go home. At the border, heart-wrenching scenes unfolded. Families stood on opposite sides of barbed wire, crying, unable to touch. Some threw letters and packages across. Some shouted messages. East German guards forced crowds back at gunpoint. Within days, the barbed wire was replaced with concrete. Within weeks, a proper wall was being constructed, 12 feet high, concrete slabs, guard towers every 300 feet, searchlights, guard dogs, and a death strip between the inner and outer walls where anyone crossing would be shot on sight. The Berlin Wall wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a statement. Communism could only survive by imprisoning its people. Almost immediately, East Germans began trying to escape across the wall. The methods ranged from ingenious to suicidal. In the first days, before the wall was fully built, people jumped from apartment windows in East Berlin to the streets of West Berlin below. Konrad Schumann, an East German border guard, famously jumped over barbed wire on August 15, 1961, just 2 days after the wall's construction. His leap captured in an iconic photograph. As the wall grew taller and stronger, escapes became more creative. People dug tunnels under the wall. Tunnel 57, dug in 1964, allowed 57 people to escape before being discovered. Others hid in car trunks, secret compartments, or fake fuel tanks. Some built hot air balloons. In 1979, two families, the Strelzics and Wetzels, flew over the wall in a homemade balloon, landing safely in West Germany. Others tried swimming across rivers or canals that marked the border. Some succeeded. Many drowned or were shot. The most audacious escape involved stealing an East German armored personnel carrier and crashing through the wall. It worked. The escapee reached West Berlin. But for every successful escape, there were tragic failures. The East German government officially recorded 140 deaths at the wall, though the actual number is likely much higher. The most famous death was Peter Fechter, shot while trying to climb the wall in 1962. He bled to death in the death strip, while both sides watched, neither helping him. For 28 years, Berlin remained divided, two separate cities, existing side by side, representing two incompatible worldviews. West Berlin became a showcase of capitalism, modern buildings, thriving economy, personal freedom, and consumer abundance. The Western Allies poured money into West Berlin, making a symbol of the free world surrounded by communism. East Berlin was grimmer. The communist government controlled everything: jobs, housing, speech, travel. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, spied on citizens, creating a surveillance state where neighbors reported on neighbors. The wall became a tourist attraction in West Berlin. Visitors climbed observation platforms to look into East Berlin. They took photos. They wrote messages on the western side of the wall, covering it with graffiti. The eastern side remained blank, pristine, guarded. No one could approach it without being shot. Families divided by the wall lived separate lives for decades. Grandparents never met grandchildren. Siblings grew old apart. Some families were allowed rare visits, heavily controlled by East German authorities. Others never saw each other again. The psychological impact was devastating. Germans on both sides knew they were the same people, artificially divided by ideology. The wall was a constant reminder of that division. American President John F. Kennedy visited West Berlin in 1963 and declared, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I am a Berliner, expressing solidarity with a divided city. President Ronald Reagan visited in 1987 and challenged Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." 2 years later, Reagan's challenge would come true. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was collapsing. Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost openness, and perestroika restructuring had unleashed forces he couldn't control. Across Eastern Europe, communist governments were falling. Poland held free elections. Hungary opened its border with Austria. Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution overthrew communism peacefully. East Germany resisted change. Leader Erich Honecker insisted the wall would stand another 100 years. But pressure was building. Throughout 1989, East Germans fled through Hungary to Austria to West Germany, a roundabout escape route that circumvented the wall. Tens of thousands left. The exodus was unstoppable. In Leipzig, East Germany, weekly protests grew from hundreds to hundreds of thousands. Citizens demanded freedom, democracy, and the right to travel. The Stasi prepared to crush the protests with violence. But Gorbachev sent a message. The Soviet Union would not support crackdown. East Germany was on its own. Honecker was forced out in October 1989. His replacement, Egon Krenz, knew the government had to make concessions or face revolution. On November 9, 1989, the East German government announced new travel regulations, allowing East Germans to visit West Germany with proper paperwork. But the announcement was bungled. Spokesman Gunnar Schabowski, reading from notes he hadn't fully reviewed, said the new policy was effective immediately without delay. That wasn't the plan. But Schabowski's words went out on live television, and everything changed. November 9, 1989, 6:57 p.m. East German spokesman Gunnar Schabowski held a press conference announcing new travel regulations. When asked when the policy took effect, He fumbled through his notes and said, "As far as I know, immediately without delay." The words went out on television and radio across East Germany. East Germans heard, "The border is open. You can travel to the west." Now, thousands of East Berliners rushed to border crossings, demanding to cross. Border guards had no orders. They tried to call superiors. No one had answers. The crowds grew larger, more insistent. At 10:30 p.m., at the Bornholmer Street checkpoint, the guard commander made a decision. Open the gate. He couldn't hold back the crowd any longer. The gate opened. East Germans flooded into West Berlin. Guards stamped passports frantically, then gave up and just let people through. Within hours, all checkpoints opened. Berliners from both sides climbed on top of the wall, celebrating, crying, embracing. Strangers hugged. Champagne flowed. People took hammers and chisels to the wall, breaking off pieces. The most famous symbol of the Cold War was being demolished by hand, one chunk at a time. West Berliners welcomed East Berliners with joy and tears. Families separated for decades reunited. A grandmother held a grandchild she'd never met. Siblings embraced after 28 years apart. The party lasted all night. The wall, which has stood for 28 years, fell in one miraculous night. The Cold War was over. The fall of the wall didn't immediately reunify Germany, but it made reunification inevitable. East Germany's government collapsed within months. Free elections were held in March 1990. The new government immediately began negotiations with West Germany for reunification. On October 3, 1990, less than a year after the wall fell, Germany officially reunified. The German Democratic Republic ceased to exist. Germany became one nation again after 45 years of division. The reunification process was complex. East Germany's economy was devastated. Decades of communist mismanagement had left it far behind West Germany. Integrating two economies, two legal systems, two cultures that had developed separately for decades was enormously challenging. Nostalgia for East Germany developed among some former East Germans who struggled with rapid change and felt left behind in a unified Germany. Others celebrated freedom but struggled economically. The physical wall was mostly demolished by 1992. Small sections remain as memorials. The East Side Gallery, a mile-long section covered with murals, became an open-air art gallery celebrating freedom. The Checkpoint Charlie Museum preserves the history of the wall and the escape attempts. The Berlin Wall Memorial honors those who died trying to cross. Berlin today is a vibrant, unified city, Germany's capital and one of Europe's most dynamic cities. The scars of division have faded but not disappeared. At least 140 people died trying to cross the Berlin Wall. The actual number is likely higher. Some deaths were never recorded or were covered up by East German authorities. The victims included men, women, and children. Some were shot by border guards. Others drowned in rivers and canals. Some died in tunnel collapses. A few were killed by mines in the death strip. Peter Fechter, 18 years old, was shot while trying to climb the wall on August 17, 1962. He fell back into the death strip, wounded and crying for help. East German guards didn't help him. He was a criminal in their eyes. West Berlin police couldn't reach him without being shot. Fechter bled to death over an hour, while both sides watched helplessly. His death shocked the world and became a symbol of the wall's brutality. Chris Geffroy was the last person killed trying to cross the wall, shot on February 6, 1989, just 9 months before the wall fell. He was 20 years old. The border guards who shot escapees were following orders. The official policy was shoot to kill. After reunification, some guards were prosecuted for these killings. Some were convicted, receiving light sentences. Others were acquitted, with courts acknowledging they'd acted under orders. The moral question remains, were border guards victims of the system or perpetrators of murder? Germany struggled with this question for years. What's certain is that 140 people died for the crime of wanting freedom. The Berlin Wall stood for 28 years, 2 months, and 26 days. It divided a city, a nation, and a world. It was built in one night to stop East Germans from fleeing communism. It fell in one night because people refused to accept division any longer. The wall proved that communism could only survive by imprisoning its people. When the Iron Curtain fell, communist governments across Eastern Europe collapsed within months. The Soviet Union itself dissolved in 1991. The Berlin Wall's fall wasn't just a German victory. It was a victory for freedom worldwide. It demonstrated that walls, borders, and tyrannies are temporary. Human desire for freedom is permanent. Today, a reunified Germany is Europe's strongest economy and a pillar of democracy. Berlin is a symbol of resilience, a city that endured division and emerged stronger. Portions of the wall remain as memorials. The Berlin Wall Memorial includes a preserved section of the Death Strip, showing exactly what the border looked like. The Topography of Terror Museum documents the Nazi and communist dictatorships that divided Germany. November 9th is celebrated in Germany as the day the wall fell. It's a reminder that change can happen overnight when people demand it. The last living border guards and escapees are now in their 70s and 80s. They carry memories of a divided city that younger Germans can barely imagine, but the wall's lessons remain relevant. Today, walls are being built around the world, physical barriers and ideological divisions. The Berlin Wall story reminds us that walls built by fear eventually fall to freedom. Remember the wall. Remember the people who died trying to cross it. Remember the families divided for decades. Remember the night it fell and the joy of reunification. And remember that no wall, no matter how tall or strong, can permanently divide people who refuse to be divided.